Welcome to Pivot Points, a new series featuring some of the world's most successful women, candidly sharing their stories and insights about how they made it to the top and how you can too. Hosted by Perry Yeatman, a straight-talking global executive and award-winning author who created the career and life of her dreams and now wants to help other ambitious women do the same.
Welcome. This is Perry Yeatman, host of Pivot Points. What can I say about our next guest? Betty Hudson is one of the smartest and funniest women I know. She is a 45-year veteran of the broadcast and television industry, although you would never know that if you looked at her. She was the first female SVP at NBC, so she broke the glass ceiling there, but then went on to senior roles at iVillage, Reader's Digest, and most recently, National Geographic Society, where she served as the CCO. I know that we're going to get so much out of listening to Betty. It'll be both entertaining and insightful, and I just can't wait to hear what she has to say. Welcome, Betty.
Well, thanks, Perry. It's a pleasure to spend time with you for any reason, but this conversation is very interesting to me. I want to hear what you want to hear.
Well, let's start at the beginning. You know, you clearly got to the top, but every one of us at some point has to kind of start at the bottom. So what do you think was your first big break, and how did you land it?
Well, when I came out of college, my first job opportunity was to get married. It was my best job offer. And I married a guy, a very nice man. The marriage didn't last, but we have a continuing good relationship, a very nice man who went into the military. And we wound up in Charleston, South Carolina, because he was in the Navy, and the Navy likes you to be near oceans. So he went to sea, and I knew nobody and needed to find a way to pass the time while he was away. I got a job in a dress shop, and I told absolutely everybody I checked out of the dress shop or sat next to at a dinner party that I was actually an advertising copywriter. And I was miscast as Miss Unbalanced Drawer at the dress shop. And eventually a guy said, okay, come in and produce a commercial for my client. He worked in sales for the local CBS affiliate. And he said, come in and do one, and let's see whether you really can get this done. So I did. It was for eggs. I can remember it to this day. For a grocery store that dealt in farm fresh produce, and I did a commercial for eggs. That led me to a production job in local TV in Charleston, South Carolina, where there were no unions and no barriers and not much money, but endless opportunity. If you were willing to put the hours in, they had more work than they had teams to do, and you could run camera, you could learn to run an audio board, you could go out and take your own picture, you could do everything. So that was my first doorway in.
First of all, congratulations on figuring out how to distinguish or differentiate your eggs, because, you know,
yeah.
I remember when
And don't have them all in one basket, by the way.
I love it. It's, you know,
yeah.
I remember you made me think of a story when I first applied to Burson Marsteller right out of college also, and I had absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. One of the assignments was to write a press release introducing scissors. And I just
perfect.
Like, you know, the eggs just reminded me of that. And I got to tell you, I'm not sure I knew what a press release was at the time, so I think I probably did a very bad job.
But you got the job, so
but I didn't get the job. Actually, that's the funny part. I didn't join Burson until like probably 7 years later. But eventually, I had learned enough, and you know they recognized my brilliance, albeit a bit late. But at any rate, you got launched. I think one of the things that I take away from that story also is that you know it may not seem glamorous at the beginning. But some of these jobs that are, you know, almost accidental, but they give you tremendous opportunity to grow and learn and do whatever you can. They really can be launch platforms, even though, as I say, you know, you get out of school and you think, wow, I should be able to get something big and exciting and, you know, really prestigious and you're, you know, selling eggs. But somebody said once, don't be a job snob. And I actually think that's a really good thing to think about if you're just starting out. You get through that, and obviously you did a really good job because you moved up. You get to about mid-career, and I know that you did get remarried and you have children. Every woman I talk to at some point, I think, kind of says, God, I felt like throwing in the towel when they're trying to balance family, caregiving, career, etc. What choices did you have to make, and how did you manage to get through that period?
That is a very tough patch of road for any woman who has had children and a job that has considerable demands. And you're responsible for the people in your office. If you're a manager, you're responsible for your home life. You've got a marriage to attend. It is challenging. As one wise woman once said to me, she said, you can have it all. You're just not going to be able to have it all at the same time. So you have to, some of it is about figuring out what your boundaries are, and some of it is about making the choices to support yourself. I was very fortunate by the time I got to mid-career that I could afford help. So I had live-in help for 16 years. And
wow.
the person who mourned most when the children finally said, "This is embarrassing, we don't need a nanny anymore," I said, it's not your nanny. You should think of this as my wife, because I need somebody to go to the store and pick up the cleaning and meet the plumber and drive you, by the way, to those endless practices while I'm in the meetings at the office. And I made a priority that I would use some of my financial resources to put that in place, because it gave the kids security and it gave me security. So I did that, and then you every now and then had to say to the guys, I can do, and it's not just guys, it's to your office situation, I am able to make this commitment to here. I have another commitment that's at home that's equally important, and I'll make it all work, but this is not negotiable. I've got to go to back to school night. I've got to be there for certain events. And then I made deals with my kids. I said to them, if you ever call me and tell me I need to come home, I'm coming home. Play that card wisely. And they did. It's comforting now when I talk to them, they are in their mid to late 20s. They say at the time there were moments when they were like, well, where is my mother? In retrospect, my daughter says she feels like she can see pathways now for herself. My model is not a perfect model, but at least it is a road map you could look at. You could say, I don't want to take that road, but I can see what it looks like as opposed to being completely unpaved in front of you.
I think that is great advice. And I do think there isn't any woman I know that either has children or wants to have children that isn't struggling in some way with this. And I think that one of the things we all have to do is to realize that it is a struggle, right? So just acknowledge that. Forget the idea that there's any solution that isn't
nothing
struggle,
easy about it.
Is. Right, exactly. It
is manageable and it's worth it. And you also have to give yourself permission to feel the weight of it. Yep. It's okay. You're not a failure because you're having a hard time balancing it. It means you're normal. Take some comfort from that.
So you made it through mid-career, obviously, with the number of organizations you worked for and the number of times you've relocated at least a few times. We know all the research says that women are so negatively perceived for negotiating, and particularly negotiating pay or promotions. If a man is assertive, a woman is aggressive, we know all the stereotypes. But talk to me about, how did you actually manage to negotiate what you really wanted and needed, both personally and professionally?
I do have one story about getting myself in position to have more leverage. You may or may not find it useful, but it's the pivot of my entire career. I can trace back to this. When I was working for that little station in Charleston, South Carolina, the 136th television market in the country, I got invited, because there were 3 television networks at the time, and there was an annual conference of the people who did broadcast on-air promotion. It was called the Broadcast Promotion Association. It's now called ProMax. But it was 600 or so people from the 200 television markets would come together, and they would have awards and clever campaigns, and the networks would host events to try and get you enlisted in service of promoting NBC or CBS or ABC's fall lineup. And because I worked for an NBC affiliate, was invited to attend. The station was too poor, they said, to fund my trip. They had never done it before. They had never had anybody who had asked about doing it before, and it just wasn't in the budget. And Perry, I don't know where this came from, but an instinct told me to take my vacation and pay my own way. And I did. And I can trace pretty much everything that happened to me later back to the connections and the expansion of the fences around my head. I'm suddenly in this environment where I see what the guys in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago are doing, and I meet people who look a lot and sound a lot like me. You wind up having people you can call when you're in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, want to have lunch and trade me I'll buy your sandwich if you show me the way your station operates. All of that was, my eyes were opened and doors and pathways became obvious. And my reward for the 2 years subsequent that I continued to work for the station in Charleston was they paid my way, because I brought back so much good information and new opportunities for them. Some of my advice would be to get your muscles flexed so that you have the street cred to go in and negotiate for yourself. And if you don't get what you want from them, figure out how to get it for yourself. Yep. In retrospect, that was not a lot of money, but it paid off in incredibly powerful ways.
Oh, that's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I think what listeners also take away from that is, it's your responsibility to invest in yourself. If you really believe in something, and as you said, the company says no or the organization says no, then you can either figure, you have two choices. Well, three choices. One is you lay down and say, okay, whatever, not important. But if you really believe in it, then you either invest in it yourself, find a way to get the money, or you say, this is not in an organization that really is going to give me opportunities, and I know I need to get opportunities, so I'm going to go look elsewhere. So I think that it's a very important lesson. Well,
and the other seismic moment in my own head was when I went to NBC. I was hired I was 29 years old, and they were bringing me to New York. I had worked for 3 NBC affiliates by coincidence rather than by design, and through this conference that I just described, I had become a member of the advisory board to the network. They would get a cross-section of affiliate promotion managers together, and they would show us campaigns and try and get us to endorse, come home to NBC, and will you put it across your airwaves. And so I got to know the guys in New York, and they offered me a job that had never existed before. So I was brought in as the vice president of corporate projects. I was, in 1979, a little naive. I thought the other people would be just thrilled to see me. This is great.
Oh, yeah.
All my new friends, they'll be so excited. I did not realize that in a world where some people think turf is finite, if somebody new shows up in the room, whose turf is she getting? And should I have had some of that? And if this didn't exist before, what would be the rationale? And why is that girl, literally when I was 20, why is that girl being made a vice president when I've been here 25 years and I'm not one? Mm-hmm. So you walk into a kind of generic rat's nest that's not necessarily of your doing, but it's a dynamic that I was kind of oblivious to. But I did pull back on those instincts, and I went to the guy who hired me and I said, give me the list of the 20 people you think in this organization I need to understand and have a relationship with. So I went, he gave me the list, went around to sit with them, to ask them what would make their life easier or their work more productive if you had an extra pair of hands or someone in the communications, public relations space thinking about your priorities. And so I took notes. I came back, I took some of their advice, and then I went back and made sure they knew I had followed their advice. And what you wind up with in that situation then is a group of people who are almost de facto on your team,
Yep.
because they called some of the plays. So early on, I tried to establish myself as a collaborative teammate. And you got to show some forward motion. It's the football season, so of course I'm using all football metaphors. But
you haven't even mentioned the Bulldogs once yet. I mean,
I know, and I hope by the time anyone hears this, we're the national champions. But if it goes the way it usually does, my heart will be broken again. But we digress. So you're not in a position to negotiate until you have demonstrated value. So my ambition early on in my days at NBC, where there were not a lot of female executives, this is the early 80s, NBC was struggling. Many of your listeners may not have even been born then. It was a struggling network, and GE bought RCA, and there was just huge change. So hanging in there and being flexible and collaborative and a real partner, not having so much of your ego in it. I'm one of those people. I want you to never have a meeting that you don't want me to come to. I want you to think you don't want a project that I'm not involved in, that it will always be better if I'm involved. I do not need to be on the stage when you are. I want to be in the back leading the cheers. And that you and I will make eye contact and we'll know we did this together. I'm happy for you to take the bow. If you really believe that, people will kill for you.
Yeah, I tell you, that is amazing. And it's also really impressive because you have, in my experience of you have a big personality, right? And so, and as one big personality kind of to another, you are not a shrinking violet.
No.
So, right, exactly. And so what's
No, I'm not. What your listeners can't see is I'm a 6 foot tall, reddish by the miracle of beauty products, haired lady of a certain age, and I'm Southern. I mean, there's just it's almost like being anti-mame,
Exactly. You don't even shy from heels either. So you're like a 6'3" woman.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
Right.
I love it. What I love about that is you have this personality, but instinctively you figured out that this was the way to play and that exactly other people were always going to want you on their team and invite you to meetings if you did things that helped them and that ultimately made them look good as well.
Well, in any situation, whether it is a social situation or a business situation or a man on the street, if I will go 75% of the way towards the other person, I'm making it easy for them to give me a little. If they'll come 50% of the way towards me, we've got an overlap there.
Yep.
And you need to take your own ego and why aren't they inviting me to the meeting? Volunteer to come. If you're approaching it as a land grab or as an entitlement, you can't do this without me because I am X, Y, and Z. People start, I think, building understandable resistance to that. If your approach is, I love what you're working on and would love to help you get where you're trying to go, tell me where I need to be to advance this agenda, it's just a different tone.
Yeah, it's very smart, very smart. So let me move now. I mean, we just talked a little bit about your physical presence, which is undoubtedly striking, right? I mean, beautiful and tall and outspoken and Southern. I mean, it is quite a package, I have to say. But when you think about it, women are clearly more harshly scrutinized on almost every front, and more so as they get higher and higher in an organization. Was this your experience, and how did you handle the intense scrutiny that you went through on everything from, what you look like to how you were parenting to your performance to whatever?
Well, I mean, in some cases it was kind of like the weather. It was there. And so you had to deal with the weather. I think as I look back on it, I was raised in an environment, my parents also, you won't be surprised if I'm Southern, they're Southern too. I was not raised in a gender role household. So everybody in my household, I have one brother, But we all did yard work. We all set the table. We all did the dishes. There weren't boy jobs and girls jobs. So I kind of came out of my childhood believing that both the opportunities and the obligations should all be even. The other great gift my parents gave me was a sense of humor. And honestly, when you strip it all away, if you can find a basis to laugh together, whether it's in office or in social work, it takes away a lot of barriers. It's not about gender. It's not about age. It's not about strata in the hierarchy in the organization. If you can find a common basis for warm humor, it is an incredible leveler. And over the years, I guess I do find a lot of things genuinely funny. But if you can also diffuse tense situations if you can find a way to get people to see some humor.
You're one of the quickest-witted people that I know, and I do think you are really funny. Did you work to develop that? Or you say you always had a sense of humor, but did you, when you realized that was actually a good strategy, did you actually then make a conscious effort to, use that more, or it just happened because it was you?
Well, I was 6 feet tall at the time I was 13. I weighed like 108 pounds, so I looked like a floor lamp.
Okay, and you know that everybody's now jealous, right? You do realize those are like the conditions of a supermodel
at
today.
The time, when you're 13 years old,
I understand.
This is a world where everybody wants to be, you're tacking towards the mean.
Yep.
And mean means both average and mean means sometimes spirit. So it's easy. If you're physically different, it's very easy to be on the receiving end of ridicule or whatever. I wasn't going to, there was a part of me that wasn't going to allow you to, you're not going to do a tall joke that I haven't already heard and possibly can best you at. I found that deflected and took the air out of some of the, the snark bombs that people want to throw around. And then it occurred to me, actually a lot of stuff in life is funny. Mm-hmm. And isn't this a fun way to relate to people? And it's not about ridicule, it's about humor. And there is a very big difference, as you and I know. So I think over time, it was a continuously reinforcing way to look at the world. And you do, if this is your MO, you also have to be aware there's some edges in there, and you got to be careful not to go too far, and every now and then you'll step across the line, and that wise guy comment turns out to hurt somebody's feelings. So you got to constantly check yourself, but it also makes being at work more fun.
Yeah, I agree with that. We all work really long and really hard, and it's like if you can't have real camaraderie and fun at the office,
right,
it's just not worth it. I mean, it is not worth it.
May I say, much of life is ridiculous. I mean, you just have to step back and go, seriously? This is crazy.
There's a reason that Dilbert and The Office and these shows actually, took root because
indeed, they resonate because you recognize it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're now at the top. You're at the executive level, and it's hard when you're already stretched in terms of how much you can do in a day for work and for home life, etc. And yet, it is really important. Everybody I've interviewed has talked about the importance of a support system and networking and making sure that you have kind of girlfriends and sponsors and mentors and whatever. How did you make a support system for yourself, and how did you keep it as you moved up in the ranks?
Well, some of this is tactics that again, self-reinforce because you're rewarded for it. I am an inveterate list maker because if I don't put it on a list,
it's gone.
It could be gone.
Yep.
And I carry a notebook around with myself and constantly. And everybody who will ever see me say, I've seen her with that. And if I'm in a meeting and it occurs to me that I need to RSVP to your party, I will write on the list Perry. Mm-hmm. And it could be right next to submit business plan. Right? Or pay your taxes. And then it will be Donna's birthday. And so I make this long running list and I copy it over at the end of the day, and I check off what I've done. When I was in full-blown work mode, because I am now sort of quasi-retired, but I'm still making the list, every morning when I hit the office, I did 5 of the personal things first. I would send you a note to congratulate you on your promotion. I would RSVP for the party. I would say, let's all go to the theater. I would do 5 things for myself at the top of the day that were around personal and keeping my network active. Well, at the end of the week, you've done 25.
Wow.
Right?
That's a lot,
it's just,
yeah.
It's just 5 a day.
Yeah,
and some
brilliant.
of them take
brilliant.
Some of them take 30 seconds. It's
Yep.
to send you, saw your piece on LinkedIn, way cool. I'm done. But you heard from me, right? So this isn't brain surgery. This is tactical. The other thing I did, and I do advise that middle career piece, almost nobody at 6 o'clock on a Thursday after a brutal work week wants to go to the reception that you RSVP'd you would go to, or wants to go to the ball game, or what. Nobody. I just want to go home and sit on the couch. Make yourself go. I've almost never made the effort to show up that I didn't get something out of it. And you don't have to stay forever. Show up. That old saying, showing up is 90%. Yep. Showing up is really important. And it keeps you visible, and it keeps you active, and you will almost always learn something. But again, I would say 3 things a week. And at the end of the year, I've done 56. They didn't teach a lot of math at Georgia. But you know, you just chuck it out. Don't do it every night. You'll kill yourself. But don't go weeks with doing nothing. You just need to reward your soul by giving yourself a little extra that's not just work and family.
You know, God, I wish I'd met you 20 years ago and gotten that piece of advice, because you are one of the best networked people I have ever met. And there you go. How simple is it? I mean, not simple when you're right. On the Thursday nights, oh, dear God, I got to admit, I wimped out way too many times probably. But that is such great advice. It's something simple, and then something you just got to get into a routine and make yourself go, even if it's for 30 minutes, and, you know, show up and then move on. Yep. Well, we're coming down to the end. So I love to ask this question.
I hope of the interview, not of life.
Yeah. Dear God, yes. Okay, let's be clear. Yes. Our time together on this interview is coming to
Yes,
the end.
Thank you for your clarification.
Absolutely. So, you know, I don't know any woman who got to the top and who didn't suffer through some either massively, you know, big failure or embarrassment or some outrageous behavior that was completely inappropriate. Would you be willing to share a story or two about things that didn't go well?
I was offered opportunities that I turned down. They wanted me to be a general manager of KMBC in Los Angeles, and they came again and asked me to be GM of WMAQ in Chicago, and I said no both times, in part because of my personal life. My husband is a journalist, and he, too, worked for NBC, and I looked at that and said, well, he can't work for me. He can't work for the competition, and we have to move to those markets. What is he going to do?
Yeah, good point.
You know, so there's the impact of your advance on other parts of your life's game board. And I thought, I don't know that mine can take this pressure. And then, you know, both of those jobs we were talking about the balance thing and where your boundaries are. What are you doing if you're in a general manager role? You're entertaining clients Monday through Thursday night. You're out hustling talent. You're trying to make the news anchor not jump off the building. Whatever it is, the demand on my life was going to be much more acute, so I passed. And that, I think, did send a message that I was going to define myself in the communications lane. I was not going to move into the management side. And, you know, I paid for that on one level, and on the other, I've had a fabulous career on the communication side, so maybe this is where it was supposed to be. I don't think that's getting at your question of horrific egg on my face. But when I think about things that I would examine more closely if I had another shot at it, that's probably one of them.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting because, I know you sit on the board of companies now, so, and I do think of that as being way more than communication. And so what you're looking at a total business. So I do think, obviously, it was a tough decision then, but the way it played out for you, it gave you the life balance you wanted at that time. And yet you still ended up in a position where, millions of women would be, thrilled to be able to sit on a company board the way you do and to be able to participate in conversations that involve all parts of the business. So
yeah, and that board seat is another one of my little life lessons. How did that come to pass? The guy who is the chairman and CEO and the company is Aflac. He and I went to the University of Georgia together. He was a sophomore when I was a senior, and I was secretary of the student body, and he was in student senate. I did not see or hear from him for 20 years. I'm working at NBC.
Wow.
I get a call that he's coming to New York and wants to have a cup of coffee. Perry, I came so close to being, oh, God, I'd love to see you, but, it's terrible because I figured he wanted Saturday Night Live tickets. People you haven't heard from in 20 years, what do they want? And then I thought, well, this is somebody I knew, back to my keep your networks active. And I remember him. I don't know who he married. I wonder what's up. It's nice of him to call me. What's a cup of coffee? So he came in. We talked about the business. We talked about the fact that he was going to be the CEO. I didn't know many CEOs to be. He leaves. I buy 100 shares of Aflac stock. It was trading at $12. I did not give it another thought. 2 weeks later, Bob Wright, who was then the CEO of NBC, came in and said that the GE Washington office had heard from the Aflac Washington office, and they wanted to invite me onto the board, but they didn't want to do it if it was going to create an issue because, some companies won't allow officers to serve. And Bob said, ordinarily GE would object, but I'm going to waive it because I think it would be good for you. Wow. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Life-changing in many, many ways, but experientially, financially, almost every Lee you can come up with. And if I had been too busy, it still makes me queasy to think about. I wouldn't know what I had missed, but I would have missed an incredible opportunity. So the bottom line is my life lessons is return your calls, take the meetings, you never the hell know.
I love it. You never the hell know. That is,
you never know.
That is so true.
And what's the worst that'll happen is he and I would have had a nice cup of coffee.
Yep. It's funny. You just used the words that people always ask me, how did you decide to go to Singapore? How did you get the guts to go to Russia? And they're like, seriously, because you made some really kind of crazy moves. And every time I ask myself exactly that same question, what's the worst that can happen? Like going to Singapore, I figured the worst thing that could happen is I fail miserably. I hate the place. So in 6 months, I come home. Exactly. Tail between my legs. I was like, I was like 20.
And I'll have a couple of custom-made outfits because they have very good tailors there.
Well, and then I figured, okay, I got to move into my parents' basement for 6 months while I look for my next opportunity. But I'm like, can I live with that? And I thought, sure, I can live with that. So, I went ahead and did it. But it's
right. And the stakes are much less if it's for a cup of coffee downstairs in your building.
There you go.
But it turned out to be a transformational experience. It led me into been going on 25 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, your last word, when you think about it, you just shared a huge amount of advice and insights with our listeners. But if you had a last word, what would you tell other women who are maybe in the launch or the mid-career phase and they are looking to do what you've done in terms of being able to build the career and the life of your dreams? What would you say to them?
Well, it is a rather large question. I think my overarching message to all of us is it is okay. It is not only okay, it is important to ask for help and to talk about, if you're ambivalent about a situation, if you're unclear what the pathway might be for you, it's okay to ask about it with your managers. It's okay to tell people who work for you, I don't know the answer to this. What do you guys think we should do? Asking for help, one, tells you who your helpers are going to be, because you'll see who responds, and keeps your network active, so you've got a feedback loop that's telling you what's possible and not possible. And it sustains your, I think it sustains you emotionally as you pick your way through some of it, because a career is not just a series of jobs. It's a chain of relationships. It's an ongoing set of experiences. There is sadness and joy and frustration and all the other. So it's an emotional ride as well as hopefully a professional one. And we all need help. So it's being vulnerable and open enough to the future and to the present to be able to say, I can't figure this out by myself. Talk to me about what you guys think I should be doing, or how I could do it better, or ask for help.
That is great. Betty, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure that our listeners have benefited tremendously, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
I can't wait. Thank you, Perry.
You've been listening to Pivot Points, a series designed to help ambitious women have the careers and lives of their dreams. To hear more interviews, go to www.yourcareeryourterms.com. And be sure to tell us what you think. If there are topics you'd like covered or people you'd like